Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be talking about mental resilience, and one of the things that I think all of us are having a hard time with is just being, dealing with the pandemic and being in the social distancing um, basic environment really has some major impacts on what's happening with our overall health and our potentially our immune function. So I know a lot of the people that have been following readers of my book and following the articles we write and everything are suffering from autoimmune disease and chronic inflammatory disorders and many chronic conditions. And there are some serious, significant impacts of this concept of being in um, social distancing that can have a profound impact on the immune system. And there's some things you really should know about to try to mitigate those types of responses. So, first of all, the psycho-neuro immune response is very, very real. And we tend to kind of ignore that. There tends to be a lot of focus with everyone that has chronic disease or chronic inflammation. Thank you, everyone that's joining. With just taking supplements or changing diets. And I can tell you one of the most powerful things is the psycho-neuro immune response. I know that in my private practice, when I see a patient who has a chronic severe autoimmune disease and I see them come in, if they're coming in and they have support from their spouse or their loved ones, they usually do a lot better when they come versus when they come in and no one in their family believes that they're sick and they're dealing with issues. So we know that is really important to know that our mental health has a significant impact on our immune system and has a significant impact on our inflammatory response and so forth. So we're kind of all at this state dealing with the social distancing that we're having decreased human contact with other people and we're more risk for having an inflammatory immune response. So let me just share with you some of the major mechanisms and pathways that take place. So the psychoneuroimmune response takes place when there's a stress response, but it can also take place when there's lack of activity of the brain. So there's a concept that's called neurogenic inflammation. And neurogenic inflammation is a concept where your psychological and cognitive thoughts and the firing rate of your brain has an impact on inflammation. And what they find is that when there's lack of activation, lack of integration in different centers of the brain, there's an inability to dampen the sympathetic pathways that really can trigger inflammation on their own. So we tend to think that inflammation can only be triggered by the immune response, but it's more than just it's really something that our emotional and cognitive functions and our brain functions can actually really promote our inflammatory immune response as well. It's very fascinating, this world of psychoneuroimmunology and neurogenic inflammation. So one of the key things is that also that if you don't have enough activation of your brain, if your brain's not stimulated, then you can significantly promote depression, inflammation, and different types of inflammatory reactions. So when you're looking at this pattern of being in social isolation, look at the stress response. There's a few things that research has really shown that to make a really big impact on how you function and how you are. So one of them is just being positive. And if you're one of the things you should understand is there's a concept called plasticity. And plasticity is the concept of when you do something over and over again, you get more and more efficient with it. So, for example, if you were trying to hit a golf ball and then you start to hit the golf ball and you start to get cleaner and smoother with your activity, then there's be a period of time where you can hit the golf ball and you're pretty accurate at doing it, and you may not even play golf for a year, come back and hit the golf ball, and you're fine. Now, on the other side, if you have bad habits and you hit the golf ball wrong or hit the tennis ball, whatever sport is your favorite, and you keep repeating that strategy, then that's how you'll actually remember to hit the ball, and it's much harder to get through. So there are people that actually have negative plasticity with their mental thoughts. I think we've all met them, but it's really important to really just maintain a positive outlook on things and to try to really practice positivity. And if you do it over and over again, then you actually develop positive plasticity pathways in your limbic system. So when we look at our limbic system and our cognitive thoughts or in our neuropsychology, it's really no different than our motor system when we learn synchronized movements and do activities. So if we repeat the same positive behavior over and over again, that has a big significance. Now, in the world of psychoneuroimmunology, there is something that is continued to show significant positive impacts, and that's gratitude. So, a lot of a lot of practitioners I know work with patients that are really sick. They always say, try to just write down, a few things, maybe 5 things that you can think about that you're happy about, and it's just a daily routine. If they can do that with some deep breathing, that can make a big difference for them. So, having gratitude, having positive plasticity really makes a significant difference in how things how it works for in relation to our mental resilience. So, we can get all types of neuroinflammatory responses that are taking place when we kind of forget that. Now, every patient's unique, every person's unique. At some point, you got to like figure out some of these things on your own. We also know that facial interaction is really, really, really important. So your brain lights up completely differently when you see a person's face than when you hear a voice. So it really, really is important to try to use things like FaceTime and Skype or whatever kind of teleconferencing app you have. But seeing people's faces has significant change in areas of the brain called the fusiform gyri, where you can actually perceive a person. But that also has very powerful impacts in areas of the brain called the limbic system, which are part of the area of the brain that controls this neurogenic inflammatory response. So you may actually have to put an effort to really try to interact with people. It's a good time to call all the friends. It's a good time to connect with people you haven't talked to in a long time. I remember my wife and I, we were just thinking about an old friend of ours, and we just FaceTimed that person right there and then. And we had such a great time, and it really changed our mood for at least a few days. So it is important to think about putting some effort into those things. And I was talking to my daughter the other night, and she's like, you really should connect with some of your friends. She goes, they're all busy, and I'm like, what are they busy doing? I'll just FaceTime them, and all they can say is not answer or do something. So it's important to make some efforts to have some facial interaction, communication that way, connect with some old friends, have some positive gratitude, think about positivity. Those are good things. Human contact's important. So giving a hug to your family members or the people you're with makes a big difference in your overall sense of well-being. And these are important. I can tell you, as a person who's been practicing functional medicine and working with significantly chronic patients for a very long time, the psycho-neuro immune part is the game changer when it comes to patients really making a difference for if they feel better or not. So those are just some general principles. I'm happy to take any questions if people have questions. My wife is helping me today because apparently I can't read. Apparently I can't read the questions fast enough, and I don't know how to scroll, and I do need help. And this is a definite weak area for me. Um, so, so she's going to help. Now, one of the some of the let's see some of the questions that are coming up here. They're not in yet. Oh, just some comments. Well, thank you. Oh, thank you for everyone for joining and saying hi. I really appreciate it. It's really nice. Sometimes you do these lives and go, no one's going to show up. Why do why do I do them? But just to see people on is such a positive thing. So thank you for doing that. It helps my mental resilience to see people on this podcast.
There's a few comments. Is meditation, deep breathing?
Yes,
heart coherence.
Danielle puts in, meditation, deep breathing, coherence. Yeah, these are significant things. Now, I can tell you for myself, a game changer for me was to learn how to do transcendental meditation. I do transcendental meditation. I try to do it twice a day for 20 minutes, and it profoundly impacts my performance, my brain function, my mood. It's one of these things that really has been a game changer for me. And when it's easy to forget to do some things like deep breathing or meditation or gratitude, but when you get in the pattern of doing it, it really is important. Beverly says hi to Miss Khararazian. She said she would do this, but she just got done working out. She's not going to say hi.
I'm not going to go on camera, sweaty. Sorry. Okay.
Anyways,
so Jan Cass says your take on neuroimmune.
My take on psycho-neuro immune. I don't understand what that means, but it's very real. I mean, actually, the most fascinating things out in the literature, in the psychoneuroimmunology literature, where they're actually showing how your thought process really impacts your health and your immune function and so forth. So.
Okay, Susan, can you please talk about the cytokine model of depression?
Yes.
Versus the you don't have enough neurotransmitter model.
Yeah. So thank you for asking that, Susan. That's a really good topic. So one of the things that we do know is that in the past, depression has really been focused on the neurotransmitter issue and neurotransmitter deficiency. And for a long time, drugs are being built on these neurotransmitter pathways, where it's serotonin reuptake inhibitor or dopamine agonist or dopamine uptake inhibitor, or a combination of different medications, or MAO inhibitor. And all these things do is they try to increase the neurotransmitter levels of the brain. And with more research now, what they're really finding is that, first of all, the outcomes of those studies can be questionable because of the degree of negative versus positive clinical trials, and there's some imbalances with that. Dr. Kelly Brogan does a great job explaining some of that stuff, and she has a great book if you're interested in that perspective of antidepressants and the flaws in research and so forth. So you definitely want to check out her information. But in the literature right now, what they're finding is that the cytokine model of inflammation is really one of the main models of depression, and that's where inflammation causes depression. Now, interestingly enough, in animal studies, when they're trying to create a depression model, what they do with animals is they socially isolate them and they decrease their movement. So they take an animal and it's basically solitary confinement. So they know that in animal research models, that's how you actually establish a study group that is depressed when they study in animals. They put them in isolation, they don't have them move, the brain doesn't get activation and stimulation, they get depressed. And for the most part, when you actually look at the neurophysiology of depression, it's pretty straightforward of what happens in this state of depression. Basically, the prefrontal cortex, the very tip of the brain, the really prefrontal area, just stops firing. And that can be caused by inflammation, that can be caused by neurotransmitter issues, but it could also be just caused by just not using your prefrontal cortex. So, finding your purpose, finding things that you want to do, trying to create tasks, trying to take on projects, those all make a huge impact on your mental health, mental resilience, and your immune function. So sometimes, the best way to really change your immune system is to find your purpose. And your purpose could be, I don't know. My purpose today is going to be to clean up my office a little bit. So that's going to really have an impact on my sense of self. And I'm hoping that when I get done, I'll have a better sense of self and some degree of better immune function and so forth. So you really have to find like tasks and things to do to really activate your prefrontal area. As your prefrontal area is activated, you change your neurochemistry, you change your mood. I mean, exercise is also a great way to do it. But the point is that, and with exercising, you still have a purpose. I'm going to try to get 10 reps in, or I'm going to try to finish the workout. So having tasks to do really are really important. So those are things to really think about when you look at the models of depression. So ultimately, depression is caused by decreased frequency of firing of the prefrontal areas. That can be caused by neurotransmitter imbalances. That can be caused by inflammation. That can be caused by just lack of activity. Lack of activity is actually the most common cause. And if you look at the peer-reviewed literature and look at the most effective ways to actually support depression, it's actually exercise. So an exercise is really nothing more than just having a purpose of trying to do something at a very basic level. At a more physiological level, you're changing heart rate, you're changing neurochemicals and all those things that when you move your body. But there's a big part of it is just that having that sense of focus. Okay.
Okay, Bill Lerner, could you comment on increased cortisol and increased Th2 response?
So Bill Lerner asks if you can what?
Bill Lerner, could you comment on increased cortisol and increased Th2 response?
Sure, increased cortisol, increased Th2 response. You got to be careful looking at cortisol responses and hormone responses when they're looking at Th1 and Th2 responses because it's dynamic and it's not so linear. So hormones aren't the only factor that is to raise a immune pathway like Th1, Th2. So these pathways have multivariant pathways where different types of reactions integrated together can have some kind of immune response. But cortisol levels, when they go up, they can have different effects. One of the main effects, and when we look at cortisol levels going up, there's a difference between immune responses with whether it's acute or chronic. And acute cortisol elevations, one of the things that will happen within the first few minutes is you increase catecholamines, you increase blood flow, you increase heart rate. And then as it goes into the first few hours, the cortisol elevation will start to have an impact on dampening NK cells and T cells, and has this suppressive effect. And then as it gets chronic, you can have these shifts in one and two. So if you see a shift between Th1 or Th2 in some kind of study, then it kind of is a timing of when that study was done and what phase of it. So it goes all over the place. I don't think it's specific just to a Th2 response.
Okay, Binny, can you talk more about the impacts of gratitude on the brain?
Okay, so the question from Vinny,
Binny,
Vinny,
Binny,
Vinny,
Binny.
gratitude in the brain. Yes, so gratitude. Well, when you look at different thoughts, there's an area of the brain called the limbic region, and the limbic areas of the brain where you process emotions, but the limbic areas of the brain are directly connected. If you ever look at the slice of the brain, you have an area of the brain called the hypothalamus, which controls all your endocrine functions. And just right around that hypothalamus area that's connected right into in the very centers of our brains is our limbic regions. And our limbic regions activate and create different types of responses versus where we are. So if we have a survival response where it's a fight or flight response, those areas of the limbic system fight to the hypothalamic areas where we create sympathetics. But gratitude seems to have a very different effect. Gratitude seems to have an effect where we activate our opioid responses, and as we activate our opioid responses in our brain, we have that sense. The fact you sit down and have gratitude and have that sense of appreciation, that is a opioid neurophysiological response. So if you can sit down and have gratitude and just think about what things are great, usually you'll smile, and when you're smiling and feeling that way, that is not a motor response. That's a neurochemical response, and there's your brain is really flooded with opioids. And when your brain gets flooded with opioids through the hypothalamic activation, those opioids are actually being released systemically, and those opioids are actually turning on and activating your Treg cells and your T cells, and it has a major impact on your immune system. And it's funny too is like when you see patients that are really really sick, there's some patients that really do well, and despite their difficulties, the fact that they have always a positive attitude completely changes their immune system and how they function. Like you can have two people develop a chronic autoimmune disease, let's say like MS. One is still really, really positive and looks at the great things, and one is just miserable. I mean, and only focuses on the negative. I mean, their progression is almost predictable of how they'll recover or not with a diet, nutrition, lifestyle protocol. So that's. I hope I answered your question there. Okay.
Okay. From Judy. Are there any tests to determine if you have Th1 or Th2 dominance?
Yes. So the question from Judy is that are there
Any
any
tests
tests
to
that tell us
determine
if we
if
have
you have
Th1 or Th2 dominance? Yeah, there are tests that do that. So conventionally with like LabCorp or other labs, what you can do is you can just measure cytokines that are associated with Th1, Th2, but they're not the most sensitive markers. The best thing to really do is what's called a cytokine stimulated test. And what you do in the lab with these, um, you get a person's blood, you isolate cells from their sample, and then you stimulate them what are called with like pokeweed mitogens, and then that will cause these cells to release cytokines, and then you can measure those cytokines, and then you can see what kind of state the cells are in. So when we're looking at things like Th1, Th2 level, Th2 function, you can look at the levels in blood for those cytokines, those messenger proteins associated with those immune responses, but they are only going to show up if it's very, very active and very, very severe. What you really want to look for from an autoimmune chronic disease perspective is how are immune cells primed. So your T cells are just sitting there, and once they're developed, they can express into a Th1 cell, which is there to activate inflammation and answer killer cells and T cells, or into a Th2 cell where they have more of an anti-inflammatory antibody producing effect. For immune infection response, you want both. But if you have a high state of inflammation, you want to really turn on, for example, those Th2 types of cells. And um, when you're looking at profiles, when they take a T cell and do a cytokine stimulated test, then they can actually see how the immune system is shifting cells into a Th1 pathway or to a Th2 pathway. It's much, much more accurate than levels. So that's called a cytokine stimulated test. We were having those measured commercially before, but they're not available. And I know Cyrex is working on getting those released soon so we can have that technology back to evaluate patients. Okay. Thank you
So
for the question.
Lisa, do you feel that hormone imbalances is the fault or the cause of autoimmune disease?
So Lisa asks, do I think hormone imbalances are the fault or the cause of autoimmune disease?
Yeah.
Well, hormone imbalances will definitely trigger and have an impact on autoimmune diseases. So we know that when there's estrogen spikes in perimenopause, that triggers the autoimmune response. We know that menstrual cycle fluctuations in a female that still has their cycles can really trigger in dysfunction in the immune system. So hormone fluctuations and surges tend to have some effect on the immune system. and it tends to be more of an activating, stimulating effect when it's spiking in and out of normal sequence. Now, is it which comes first? Well, I think the immune system can actually attack the endocrine system. So the most common autoimmune disease in the world is Hashimoto's, where the immune system attacks the thyroid gland. So you get thyroid disorders secondary to an immune response. But also, for example, in thyroid disease, thyroid hormones have been shown to modulate the immune system. And with thyroid patients, there's always what we call a honeymoon phase. Where they first find out they're hypothyroid, they go on thyroid replacement, they feel a lot better. And the initial stages of um, thyroid replacement, thyroid hormones have been shown to massively dampen inflammation in the body and modulate the immune system. That effect doesn't seem to last for a long period of time, but it does last for people for the first few weeks. And maybe for people a couple of months later, but then eventually they go back to their regular inflammatory state. So there's a bidirectional relationship. There's also a lot of people that have antibodies to their ovarian tissue. They don't know that. That's a common cause of infertility. There are a lot of people that have chronically low blood pressure and chronically low blood sugar symptoms, and they can't fix that. And they actually have adrenal antibodies that are subtle, and they haven't progressed to what's called Addison's disease. So there's a relationship between hormones on the immune response and autoimmune flare-ups, but also the endocrine system is a major target area for autoimmunity. I think more so than people realize. I can't tell you how shocked I was when I started to run ovarian antibodies with people and females and see how common that was and how strongly that was linked to patients with infertility and also just patients that chronically that come in chronically have chronic low blood pressure and they've had it since they were like 16 and they just can't get their blood pressure up and they're always struggling to maintain their blood sugar stability, and then you actually test them and they have this antibodies to their adrenal gland system. So I think it's a both ways. Lisa, I noticed this long patient from Encinitas office. We appreciate what you're doing. Hey, good to hear from you, Lisa.
Doris, when are you going to come out with a new book?
Doris, we're working on a new book right now. Elaine Marshall is helping me. She helps edit my material and takes some of the stuff that I've taught about on seminars, and we get the transcriptions and we start converting that into a book. So it's much more readable than a formal lecture. And we're working right now on a book on intestinal permeability, and we don't actually have a title name for it at this point. But the reason I want to write a book on intestinal permeability is because it has really become simplified to something that is not simple. Right now, if you look at anywhere on the internet or read it, whatever let's talk about intestinal permeability, it's just like avoid every single food and take glutamine and magic should happen. And that is not real. So in this book, we cover almost 25, 30 different mechanisms for intestinal permeability, and we reference everything with the research. And then we talk about clinical approaches to intestinal permeability. And, the whole model of just taking glutamine and restricting a few foods to fix it is really a very limited model. There's also different types of intestinal permeability, pericellular, transcellular, and those types could either have what's called endotoxemia, where they get bacteria that gets into the circulation and causes reactions. And so not all leaky gut's the same, and there's lots of different mechanisms for leaky guts. So I'm hopefully trying to write a book to really summarize the literature and research that's already out there, but has been simplified to a very inefficient model in the world of functional medicine and nutrition. So that's the next book.
Okay, Milana, can we replace probiotics with a raw homemade kefir and reach the same effect for nourishing our microbiota during the healing of our Hashimoto's?
Okay, so let me repeat that. Can basically who is that from?
Milana.
Milana. So Milana, the question is, can you use kefir you make at home to support your system for probiotics and heal? And of course, you can do that. Let me explain something about probiotics and kefir and any kind of things you use for your gut. One of the things that is really coming out with the Human Genome Project, Human Microbiome Project, and it was that different people respond to different types of probiotics to have an effect. We know that there's some beneficial probiotics like acidophilus and so forth that we want to have in healthier populations, and lots of research shows that they're beneficial. But what they're finding is that just taking a probiotic may not work based on your microbiome versus someone else's, or you can have a different effect with a probiotic at a certain time in your lifespan with the same probiotic versus a different time. So your baseline microbiome status will actually determine which types of probiotics you seem to react to. Kefir is definitely fantastic if you can help it, if you can use to take support your gut. That'll typically have a lot of overall general benefits. So it's great that you're doing that. But just know, as far as the concept of probiotics, what the research is really showing is that there's so much difference in impact based on your pre-existing microbiome and how it feeds it. For me, one of the things that I put together was a 3D immune tolerance protocol where I teach people how to do a veggie mashup to get lots of different plant fibers. And one of the key things is diversity of the gut seems to be the big issue. And diversity of the gut is really determined by lots of different plant fibers. So if you can really diversify your gut and get lots of different plant fibers there, then that can really change your microbiome. And the more diverse bacteria you have in your gut, the more efficient that would be. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay.
Okay.
Zima.
Zima.
What is your opinion of bovine immunoglobulin (IgG) supplements for food sensitivities, non-dairy permeability?
So Zima asked, what about taking immunoglobulin nutritional protocols?
What is your opinion?
My opinion on them, I think I've seen they have for most people we have varied effects. For most people, I don't see much of effect. They tend to be quite expensive. So I mean, I'm always open for patients wanting to try it for themselves to see if it works for them, but I haven't seen it as an immediate go-to in my clinical practice for making much of a difference for them. And there's so many other nutrients that could be more effective in managing their immune system and their immune tolerance than that. So it's not the first thing I go to, but for some people they do notice some benefits of it, but that's a problem is we don't know which people react to it and respond to it. So um, for me, it's lower on the clinical usage scale.
Okay, Rebecca says, please will you add a chapter in your new book on the blood-brain barrier permeability
Oh,
too?
of course, yeah. So Rebecca asked, can we talk about the blood-brain barrier? Yes, the blood-brain barrier is overlooked. Blood-brain barrier permeability is a really, really common phenomenon. We're learning more and more about the blood-brain barrier. We just published a paper in the Journal of Molecular Science, with Dr. Bijdani, myself, and Dr. Uh, Martha Herbert, where we showed that intestinal inflammation and leaky gut actually causes blood-brain barrier permeability, and that was one of the first major papers that really showed that. We took patients that had inflammatory bowel disease confirmed by ASCA and ANCA, and then we measured blood-brain barrier proteins in S100B, and we were able to show that there was a significant risk by having intestinal permeability for having blood-brain barrier permeability, and then we're able to calculate odds ratios, and we also showed a very high degree of correlation between those two. So the interesting thing is, if you have intestinal permeability, it's very likely that you have blood-brain barrier permeability as well, and we'll definitely add a chapter in that in the new book. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, Jana, what is testing called to check for adrenal antibodies, and is it common?
So Jana, the testing for adrenal antibodies is called 21 hydroxylase. So any conventional lab can do them. 21 hydro. There's different target proteins for the adrenal glands, but the one that most commonly shows up is 21 hydroxylase. 21 hydroxylase is the enzyme that helps produce adrenal hormones. And just like with Hashimoto's, the main target enzyme protein antibody is called TPO. And with the adrenal glands, it's actually not TPO, but it's 21 hydroxylase. So if you can have your doctor on 21 hydroxylase, then you'll be able to screen for adrenal autoimmunity. There's also other target proteins that are not as common, but that's the one to get the most results from.
Okay, Susan, vitamin D. I've heard it's important for stable mood. How important is direct sun versus diet versus supplementation for adequate levels?
Great questions. The question was about vitamin D and its impact on mood. So, the interesting thing is that when they look at areas where there's not enough sunlight, they see vitamin D cell levels low, and they also see that there's 7 different degrees of depression, and they make this association between vitamin D level status and mood and so forth. But typically in a real clinical setting, when you see people take vitamin D, you don't see their depression go away. So it may just be an association, but it's not really the own mechanism. So actually, sunlight has a different effect than just impacting vitamin D. So sunlight actually fires in light when it comes into your system, especially full spectrum light when it comes into your system. It hits your retina, and then you have this activation of your projections of this light, the spectrum of light, to your optic chiasma, and then you have these supra periventricular nuclei that fire into your limbic system, and they activate your levels of serotonin and melatonin and so forth. So actually, full spectrum light, and people sometimes use full spectrum light therapy for changing their mood. So I don't necessarily. I think when people associate vitamin D in regions like I don't know, Alaska or Washington or different countries where they don't have sunlight as a link to depression. That's an association, it's not causation. But it seems like the main thing is actually getting that full spectrum sunlight to actually activate those pineal and pituitary pathways that then turn on massive serotonin dopamine activity that can really change mood. So I don't think you can just take vitamin D and change your mood. I think you're actually going to have to get full spectrum light to change it, because I don't think the mechanism is just the D. I think it's actually the light activation of these neurotransmitter pathways.
Okay, Kathy says, I have Hashimoto's and would like to take your upcoming class, but I am not a medical professional or student. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial.
Okay, so Kathy asked about the upcoming Hashimoto's class we have at the Khararazian Institute. She's not a practitioner. She wants to know if she should take it. So that's a let me try to answer that. Well, the class that we're teaching at the Khararazian Institute on Hashimoto's, it's a two day course, and it's going to be streamed and it'll be on demand. It'll be streamed on the day of the event, and then after the event, you can get it at any time on demand. But it's really designed to go over all the research and all the pathophysiology. So if you're not a healthcare professional, it may not be for you. But on the other hand, what I've learned working with my patients are smart. My patients are extremely up to date on the literature. Sometimes they come in and they're almost scary. Uh, and I go, you should be in practice. But if you are trying to look for if you're interested in seeing the actual data and research and the actual mechanisms, then I would definitely encourage it. If you haven't had a lot of background in physiology, some of the terminology, maybe some things you'll have to look up, and it might be not worth your while if you have to struggle with physiology terms. But it really is a it's not a course that's simplified with this is what you do. It's really uh, for the patient. It's really designed to show all the current and up to date research on Hashimoto's and the pathophysiology of these mechanisms. I'm actually very excited that's coming on. It's for me getting to share all this new information. The book I wrote on Hashimoto's was in 2009, so it's almost 20 years since, and we learned so much about Hashimoto since then. So I'm really excited to be able to update people on some of the new things, and eventually, hopefully, we can convert a lot of that new information into a book as well.
Okay, Doris, can you explain adrenal fatigue?
Can I explain adrenal fatigue? Okay, yes, adrenal fatigue. So adrenal fatigue is something is a term that's used in functional medicine and alternative medicine nutrition. It's not really a disease process. So there's a lot of all these arguments of like how do you define it and what it is. And for the most part, you're going to get different answers with you ask because we don't have a clear definition of what adrenal fatigue is. But technically, adrenal fatigue uh, would be defined by most people as you do a cortisol profile to measure cortisol levels throughout the day, and there's a circadian rhythm, and you're trying to see if your cortisol output matches most people's cortisol output in the population, and that's where the reference range comes from. And the reference range is established usually by laboratories that are called CLIA certified. And CLIA certified means they have to go through standard operating procedures to determine what the patient population range is, and then they have to show that someone's is outside of that range. So simply put, adrenal fatigue means your cortisol levels are not as similar to the rest of the population, and that you may need to do some things to to support that. And people in functional medicine nutrition will do things like reduce stimulants and provide botanicals like adaptogens or B vitamins or nutrients, help stabilize blood sugar levels and see if those cortisol levels go back. So I think most people define adrenal fatigue as abnormal levels of cortisol compared to levels of the general population. And it's not necessarily classified as a disease. It's not Addison's disease, and it's not adrenal gland hypoplasia. It's just a functional expression, just like someone can have a functional hypoglycemia or a low blood sugar state. It's not a disease, it's just a physiological response.
Okay, my computer froze. Sorry. Julie, main cause for extreme head fog. Where to start?
Main cause for extreme head fog, start with brain inflammation. So if you have a lot of brain fog, it's very likely that you have brain inflammation. So in your brain, you have cells called microglial cells, and microglial cells get activated through any kind of systemic inflammation, and they really decrease the speed and the firing rate of your nerve conductance, and that is what most people call brain fog. So I wrote a book on the brain, Why Isn't My Brain Working? And I've spent a lot of time explaining the mechanism and concept behind it, a section on brain inflammation or neuroinflammation. I can't remember, but it's in the table of contents. And it lists a whole list of nutraceuticals that you can support, but also a lot of times it's just inflammation. Like it's not uncommon to see someone who is gluten sensitive get off gluten. That's finally when their brain fog goes away, or they have dairy intolerance or things like that. The most common dietary causes of brain fog in the population that I've seen as a practitioner is gluten and dairy intolerance, and you got to remove those for a period of time. And other than that, if you have an inflammatory condition, inflammatory disease, you got to get that under control. And then maybe the third step is to go look at all the flavonoids that have been published that dampen brain inflammation. The main ones are resveratrol, uh, turmeric, with having the most amount of research to dampen brain inflammation. Okay.
Okay. Um, David, if a person eats a perfect diet but still has hypoglycemia, what treatment can be done for them?
So David asked if a person eats a perfect diet and still has hypoglycemia, what can be done with them? What do you
Done
do?
for them.
Done for them. Okay, so this is actually how I teach practitioners how to look at blood sugar issues. So one of the things we that I teach practitioners is go listen when you look evaluate a patient, see if they have a blood sugar issue. The first clue that is if someone has a blood sugar issue is that there's a change in energy after they eat. So normally there should be no change in your energy levels after you eat. Right? The only thing that should happen after you eat is you're not hungry anymore. Now, what makes hypoglycemics diagnosable or that doesn't scream out clinically is that when they eat, their function comes back. They can think again, they can focus again, they can concentrate again. That's a sign that their blood sugar is too low. So if that's happening all the time, then that clinically indicates that the person's hypoglycemic. People that and that's a low blood sugar state. People that have a high blood sugar state, like insulin resistance, they'll eat and they just get tired and crash and crave sugar, and they kind of get in that vicious cycle. But once we identify that whether they have high insulin patterns and the insulin resistance issues and fatigue and crave sugar, or they have a low hypoglycemia pattern, um, then the next question is, does their diet justify it? So if I see hypoglycemic, if I see a patient has hypoglycemic patterns where they actually feel better and they can function, they can function again after they eat, then the next question is, what's your diet like? And if they're eating a diet that's like, oh, I skip breakfast, or I have a gluten-free muffin with breakfast with a coffee drink that's made with whipped cream and sugar at Starbucks, caramel sauce on the side or something, and that'll take me till like 2, and then I crash, and then I have a cookie with a really healthy salad, and then I crash again, and then at 4 o'clock I have to have a piece of chocolate. Yeah, you should be hypoglycemic because that lifestyle is causing hypoglycemia. But someone else can come in with hypoglycemia symptoms and go, hey, listen, I wake up in the morning, I immediately have to eat protein. I eat a lot of protein in the morning, and then I eat high amounts of protein and fiber every 2 hours. And despite doing that, I'm still hypoglycemic. So the first example, that person basically is causing hypoglycemia because of their dietary choices and how they're eating throughout the day. Second choice, something is causing their hypoglycemia, and that's something that is really making their adrenal glands not able to produce cortisol. And those are related to um, infections. Those are related to significant inflammatory responses. Those are sometimes happening after brain injuries. But there is an underlying mechanism that's causing that you have to identify, and it's not, you can't supplement your way out of it by supporting adrenal glands. So you may need to look at it. For some people, it's like they have celiac disease and they just have a very significant response to things like gluten. They can't get off it. For other people, they have like they don't even know it, but they actually have something like hepatitis C. And you really need a thorough evaluation by a really good functional medicine practitioner to find out what's causing your adrenal glands to not work properly, so you're always in a low hypoglycemia state. You also need to make sure there's no pathology there, any kind of diseases. So you really need a good workup if you're eating really well. Now the problem with hypoglycemics, I should also say, is they all think they eat really well, and they actually do have good food choices. They're just not eating frequently enough. So you go to a hypoglycemic, what do you eat? Well, I have a fruit smoothie every morning. I have lots of fruit in it, and I put apple juice. I make my own apple juice. And then, what do you have for lunch? Oh, well, let me do. Then they'll just be like, oh, I'll have some fruit salad, and they're basically a fruitaholic, or the food choices seem good, but it's way still too much sugar, and they're not getting enough fiber and protein with it. So a lot of times with a lot of hypoglycemics, you just say just eat vegetables for a while and stop the fruit, and they're like, wait, what about all my nutrients? Well, all your nutrients are still in vegetables. The only difference between vegetables and fruits is there's no sugar. So, sometimes I make a joke and say, like, there's people that are hummingbirds out there. All they're doing is eating sugar all day, and they're fruit and healthy, but it's causing them to be hypoglycemic. So make sure it's not just the fruit issue. So if you have hypoglycemia symptoms, you really can't have fruit by itself. You really need high amounts of fiber in combination with it, or just stay off fruit for a while and build your system back up, your adrenal glands back up, and have vegetables. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Renee says, in your pre-testing materials for the Hashimoto's course, you mentioned that favorable effect that Lactobacillus reuteri has on thyroid function in animals. Can we extrapolate that to humans?
Well, again, with any animal studies extrapolation in human, it's never 100%, and also, but it does give us some significant impact. A lot of these animal studies, they have to cut the thyroid gland and see what happened to the thyroid gland, or they open up the brain and see what happened to brain cells. So sometimes with the research designs, there has to be animal study designs to be able to answer those questions, but they can't do human studies with some of those mechanisms. But we're always cautious to interpret that. But again, with any kind of probiotic, it really depends on your pre-microbiotic state to see if that's a way to support it or not. But in general, the key thing with Hashimoto's isn't that there's a perfect strain of probiotics. You just want to keep your microbiome diverse and healthy, and eat lots of pre-fibrous foods or fibrous foods and a lot of diverse foods to really make the biggest difference in your microbiome health.
Okay, Michael, is there a way to correct insulin resistance? Less simple carbs? Question mark.
Is there a way to correct insulin resistance?
By less simple carbs?
Oh,
questioning.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to correct your insulin resistance, if you have insulin resistance and you fatigue and you crave sugar and you're heading towards diabetes, I mean, the key thing is first to limit sugar and starch and see if that helps you. The best way to know how to do that is just to eat a meal and see if you get tired. If you eat a meal and get tired, it's still too much sugar and carbs. And for some patients, when they find out that any kind of carbs or any kind of sugar makes them pass out, they have to then try like a vegetable protein type of diet. And if a vegetable protein type diet still makes them tired, then just maybe the content of their food. So they kind of go from reducing carbs, reducing sugars, and then maybe just vegetable and protein, see if that helps. And if vegetable protein still doesn't help you, then it's the portion size. For some people, that still doesn't help. And for some people, one of the best strategies when that happens is just to go on a trial of ketosis to really stop insulin levels. When you get into a ketogenic state, ketone levels drop sometimes by 50% throughout the day. And that really calms their insulin levels throughout the day. So the insulin receptor sites can start to respond again and not be resistant. And for some people, the only way to get out of a chronic insulin resistance issue, because they just can't cut enough carbs and sugars or food, is to get into ketosis. And then for other people, it even has to be further, that they not only get into ketosis, they have to do some intermittent fasting. And the goal of all these things is to drop circulating insulin levels for an extended period of time so the receptor sites can regain their sensitivity. So if you have really severe insulin resistance and you can't just limit your sugar and limiting your sugar intake and carbs is not really changing that, then you may have to, go into a ketogenic state for a period of time, and also get into some intermittent fasting, and let your systemic insulin levels drop for several weeks and months, and then you can kind of reset and then figure out how much carbohydrates you can handle. And you may go through different rounds of ketosis, intermittent fasting, until you kind of balance out. It might take you many months.
Okay, Debbie, after you therapeutically address inflammatory cytokines, leaky gut, and an overactive immune system, when do you address decreased hormone levels, either nutritionally or synthetically? I've just watched your perimenopause webinar.
Oh, so once you this is repair. So if what?
Debbie,
So Debbie's asking, once you like calm down inflammation,
Yes.
if it's leaky gut and get rid of the inflammatory, like, when do you address hormones?
When do you address decreased hormone levels, either nutritionally or
Yeah. So
synthetically?
I mean, I don't think it's that linear as an approach, but sometimes you have to address hormone levels first. I'm sorry, it's case dependent. I don't have a good answer for you, Debbie. I don't know. It's case dependent. I don't have a general rule for that. So I'm sorry. That sucked. Sorry.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Susan, can too much exercise disrupt the parts of the brain function that cause depression, making it worse? Can too much?
Yes. So the question is, can too much exercise impact parts of the brain that make the patient worse?
Yeah.
The answer is absolutely yes. And in the exercise physiology journals, they call this overtraining syndrome. And one of the key features of overtraining syndrome is massive depression. So when they look at exercise physiologists have really done extensive research on overtraining syndrome because what happens is athletic performance goes down. And one of the key clues that you're in an overtraining syndrome pattern is that you can't do the same workout. Your performance is going down and down and down as you're exercising. And the first clinical symptom of overtraining syndrome is depression. So they've measured people when they finish the Ironman and they do these extensive exercises, they get to overtraining syndrome for all the different levels of biomarkers, and they find the most consistent biomarker is a cytokine called interleukin 6. And interleukin 6 is reflective of how quickly they can recover out of overtraining syndrome. IL-6 levels directly correlate to the severity of um, depression that they get. And basically, IL-6 creates this inflammatory response throughout the body, including the brain, and it shuts down the activation of the prefrontal cortex. So there's massive depression. So if you're getting to the point where you can't overtrain and absolutely develop depression. So you may want to look at the overtraining syndrome information on that. Okay.
Okay, Sean says, when should one test thyroid hormones for accurate interpretation? First thing in the morning, 24 hours after the last dose seems to work well for T4 only due to its longer half-life.
Okay.
But if one is taking T3 too, it peaks at 4 hours, then is already low again the following morning. Help us understand what is best.
That's a long question.
I know, sorry. When should one test thyroid hormones?
Okay, so the question is, when should you test thyroid hormones? In the morning, in the middle of the day, or throughout? Well, first of all, let's talk about thyroid hormones. Not all thyroid hormones are the same. So let me give you an example. Free T3 and free T4 are not stable, meaning it's very hard to get an accurate level of them in the laboratory. So people assume that T3, T4, free T3, free T4, TSH all have a degree of stability. Well, TSH is very, very stable. TSH levels, if you measure, they are pretty consistent and reliable when you test it minutes away, hours away, and from lab to lab. Free T3 is all over the place. So if you're trying to look at your free T3 and T4 levels and T4, you can't compare them to each other just because of their stability. So TSH is the most reliable test. The key thing is really just to look at your thyroid levels the same part of the day each time. So if you're the key thing with your personal thyroid evaluation is to determine how you respond to different types of treatments and how you're progressing or not progressing. So the standard approach is just to do it first thing in the morning and then compare that as your baseline. They look at studies where they look at TSH fluctuations throughout the day. TSH levels don't fluctuate much throughout the day, so they're pretty reliable when you do them. Free T3, T4 are all over the place all throughout the day, and some degree of T4 and T3 is all over the place. So remember, what you're measuring in the blood with T4 and T3 is dynamic. Sometimes it's being converted to free, sometimes the frees get bound up by tissues right away and get eliminated very quickly. So when you're looking at how your thyroid status is and comparing it to how it's functioning, TSH is still the most reliable way to determine if your thyroid gland is functioning the best way. Free T3, T4, they've changed all throughout the day. There's not stable as a biomarker in the lab to measure. So there's lots of issues that are difficult with it. So I would just suggest if you're monitoring your thyroid, just do TSH like in the morning each time, and that would be a good way to do it. You can actually do it any part of the day. TSH is stable pretty much throughout the day.
Okay, Elaine, what GI/parasite panel do you recommend when someone is hunting for a hidden source of chronic inflammation?
The GI panel that I recommend, I don't know if I recommend, the GI panel that I use in my own practice is one through Genova, and I like that test because they do two types of technologies. They do a parasitology test, which is a standard approach where they see if they can see the parasite. But with the most common test, they do what's called PCR testing. And with the PCR testing, they can see any small DNA fragments that could be found in the stool to determine if there's an infection. So PCR testing, it's getting popular today because we're hearing all about this with coronavirus, doing PCR. PCR is a test where they look at DNA fragments, and then they can measure replication, and they can see if it's an indication that the infection is active. So the reason I like the Genova one is that they do PCR testing for the most common pathogenic parasites in their profile, but they also do the routine parasitology. But I'm really attracted to their test because they do the PCR. And all lab tests have faults, and not all of them can find parasites or bugs all the time. But also, a lot of people don't actually have them. So people don't know where is the balance? Is it the testing that's off, or do people really think that parasites? They don't. It's hard to say.
Billy, as a Hashimoto's patient, Which blood markers and how often do you recommend being tested while trying the
Not so
elimination diet?
easy. Not so easy
It's
to cut
not so
off.
easy.
Can't see the question. The reason my lovely wife is helping me today is because the questions keep going off and you can't read them. So
I'm all sweaty. Hi. Okay.
So
Sorry.
see now. So the question is, what's the
As a
best?
Hashimoto's patient, which blood markers and how often do you recommend to be tested while trying an elimination diet?
As a Hashimoto's patient, try to look at your markers and see which markers are useful to you. To be quite honest with you, you shouldn't waste your time looking at biomarkers to see if your Hashimoto's is getting better just from a dietary change. You should really be looking at your overall inflammation, how you're feeling, your energy levels. Those are much more diagnostic for you. TSH levels are only going to show up with drastic change in your thyroid follicular output. A dietary change may not have that big of an impact on that pathway. And then when you look at things like TPO antibodies can be somewhat useful, but they also fluctuate, and many factors can drive them up besides your diet. Like your diet could have a great change in your physiology, but you get exposed or you get lack of sleep the day before and that triggers your immune response. So your TPO looks abnormal. So I wouldn't necessarily think the best thing to do to monitor the effects of any kind of dietary change would be looking at TSH, T4, T3, or TPO if you have Hashimoto's. The best thing is just to see how you feel, your energy levels, your degree of inflammation. Those would be much better. Even markers for inflammation like C-reactive protein and acute phase reactants like ferritin, they're not always that responsive and quick enough for you to see these cell changes that you may have with diet. So I would go with more how you feel in your symptoms versus just looking at any thyroid laboratory markers.
Okay, Michael, stupid question. No, it's not. But do anti-inflammatory over-the-counter drugs reduce brain inflammation? How about the omegas? I understand ideal should be prevention. Thanks.
Do anti-inflammatory drugs decrease brain inflammation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So when you take over-the-counter anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, or anything else you take, they do reduce inflammation. And then there's some drugs that reduce inflammation, like certain antibiotic strains have been shown to reduce inflammation very aggressively in the brain for a period of time. So, and it's not the intended effect, but it does happen. We see it all the time with people that are diagnosed with Lyme. They have significant brain inflammation. They go on an antibiotic, let's put it this way: they have significant brain inflammation. They get misdiagnosed as having Lyme. They go on antibiotics to treat their Lyme. That dampens their brain inflammation. And they go, "Oh, I must have had Lyme because the antibiotic helped." So things like antibiotics over the counter do have an impact on dampening neuroinflammation for sure. Natural compounds have a very powerful effect on dampening neuroinflammation too. Pomegranate extract is great. Acai extract, curcumin, turmeric, they all seem to have an impact on the microglial cells. Okay. By the way, thank you for everyone with the positive comments. I see of them, and it's very nice. Thank you. I wish I could respond to everyone, but I can't. But I do appreciate it, and thank you for taking the time to say something positive. So thank you.
Okay, so Marcia, if all foods trigger MCAS symptoms, is it possible to benefit from a mashup approach?
So the MCA, mast cell activation syndrome. So
if all foods trigger it.
Who's asking that?
Marcia.
Well, if all foods are causing mast cell activation syndromes, we may definitely need to work with a physician to look at strategies to dampen your mast cells much more aggressively than what you may do with diet and nutrition. However, the mashup, the microbiome mashup we talk about in the 3D immune tolerance program can be very helpful for you. If some of you guys are familiar with the 3D immune tolerance program, it's a program that we put together, and it's the 3D stands for diversify, distinguish, and downregulate. Not like three-dimensional, but distinguish, downregulate, and diversify. And I put together a notes video package with my team, and it really goes into how to eat and how to really improve your immune system. So if you're reacting to every single food, that's the whole purpose of trying to improve your oral tolerance. So I would definitely have you consider it. If you actually do have mast cell activation syndrome, the 3D immune tolerance program may not be enough because you have some genetic uniquenesses in your degree of severity of releasing histamines from your mast cells. So you may also need a conventional approach to help your symptoms if you really actually do have mast cell activation syndrome. Okay, next.
So super positive comments. People are just super kind. It's this isn't easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. Reading the questions. Surprise, surprise. I don't know if you guys are married, but the best thing in the world is when you're right and your spouse is wrong.
Oh.
What's the next question? Everyone's waiting.
Just tap dance a little.
What's the next question?
Oh my gosh. Mark says, can't wait for the next course. Thank you, Mark. It's very kind. Okay. I'm trying to find.
Oh, I can see some questions.
Okay. Jana, would you see an increase in ferritin if you increase your thyroid medications?
Would you see an increase in ferritin if you increase your thyroid medications?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. You shouldn't actually have your thyroid medication increase your ferritin. Ferritin is an acute phase reactant. It only goes up when you have significant inflammation, and thyroid hormones should dampen that. So you got to make sure that if that's the case, that the medication was the only thing that happened during that time frame where your ferritin levels rose. So thyroid medications shouldn't raise your ferritin levels. You may you know if you're for sure if you're sure that it was only the medication you took that raised your ferritin levels, and also if you notice that the medication maybe is making you feeling the best, you could be reacting to some of the fillers in the medication. And there is a form of thyroid replacement called Tyrosint, and Tyrosint is different than most medications because it's not a tablet. And when thyroid hormones are put in a tablet, they all have fillers. And in some of these fillers are things like cornstarch, and some people that have Hashimoto's are sensitive to different types of corn and cornstarch, some of the fillers that are put in there. So you may want to confirm that it really was your thyroid replacement. If people react to the thyroid replacement, one of the first things they notice is like when they forget to take it, they just feel better. Sometimes like they go on a camping trip and forgot the replacement. They're not, and then they haven't taken the replacement for a few days, and then they come back and take it, and they go and they notice how much better they felt without it. That's a strong sign that you may have reactions to your fillers. And if that's the case, you may want to consider something like Tyrosint, which is a gel capsule. And there's also a Tyrosint SOL, which is a liquid without a gel. If you're for people that are extremely sensitive to gel, but those are things I would think about. You shouldn't see your ferritin go up.
Courtney, love your dynamic. Happy to see your wife. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
Okay, Julie, best test and treatment for possible mercury exposure.
Best test and treatment for possible mercury exposure. Okay, so let me explain a few things. So we all have mercury exposure all the time. It's one of the most common toxic chemicals that we get exposed to. So um, when you look at mercury, you have to understand a few things. If you have acute mercury exposure, the best test for that is actually a serum blood mercury level. And all your conventional labs like LabCorp Quest offer serum mercury levels, and that is telling you you have mercury in your blood. And if you have mercury in your circulating blood, then it was a recent exposure. Now, that's different than what people do called a DMPS challenge test, where they have a person take a chelating agent and then they measure their urine levels before and after the chelating agent. And then if you do the DMPS challenge test, virtually everyone is going to have heavy metals and mercury in it. So that's different than getting acute exposure. But I would really suggest if you really think you're getting exposure on a regular basis right now, then do a blood test and see if your blood mercury levels are high. I mean, a lot of people do get high levels of mercury exposure just from too much seafood. I mean, it is a real thing. There's a high level of seafood, mercury contaminants in seafood. And if you're like eating sushi every day and eating fish every day, you want to check your serum mercury levels as a test. There's a third way to test for reactions to mercury, which is a mercury antibody test, and that's mercury bound to albumin, and they see if the person makes antibodies for it, and that's an immune response to mercury. So there's three main types of testing: your serum levels, which lets you know of acute exposure; DMPS or DMSA challenge, which is a chelating substance, which means you have tissue burden in your body at some point, which we all do to some degree; and then the mercury antibody test with Cyrix measures, which means your immune system is reacting to mercury compounds. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Okay, this is like a two-parter. Milana asks, thank you very much. I have all of your books and listened to your seminars. It was super helpful for my healing journey. Turmeric and resveratrol are definitely working. Thanks for the supplements you helped to develop. And then the follow-up to that is, Jonah Lynn says, how many milligrams of turmeric do you take, and who do you recommend?
Okay, well, thank you for reading my books and sharing your story with them. How much milligrams of turmeric and curcumin do I recommend? I recommend as much as you need. turmeric and curcumin is kind of the analogy is like you're trying to put out a forest fire. How much water do you need? For people that are in inflammatory states, they just may need more than other people. So you can't really overdose on turmeric and curcumin. With things like resveratrol, you can like start to have uh, watery bowel movements if you take too much. But you can need to experiment with it because the dosage, dosages aren't determined. These dosages aren't based on an RDA level or what is it to reach RDA levels or of a dietary intake per day that you need. They're used to block inflammation. So if you have a lot of inflammation, you may need to take it like you might take a dose of some anti-inflammatory nutraceutical, and maybe it helps you for like the first 2 hours, but then the dose stops working for you. So you might have to take it again, and you have to figure out what the dosage is. So there's definitely some experimentation that's involved with that. Okay, last question here.
Sure. How does okay? It's a two-parter again. How does hold on? Okay, Michael says I believe TMG reduces homocysteine. Does this then also reduce inflammation? And then the
So
second part of that is sorry.
wait, let me just do the
Someone
first.
says how does it do it then?
Trimethylglycine,
Like TMG.
TMG. The question is, does TMG
It
reduce?
says TMG.
So the question is, does TMG reduce?
Yeah, I believe TMG reduces homocysteine.
Yeah. So
And then how does that work?
So the question is this: the question is, does TMG reduce homocysteine? So TMG is trimethylglycine, and trimethylglycine are methyl donors that can be used to lower homocysteine. So homocysteine is an inflammatory biomarker. You can measure it in serum, and it's been shown to cause significant inflammation throughout the body. It's been most known for causing blood vessel inflammation and its risk for cardiovascular disease. But homocysteine also is very inflammatory and degenerates the brain. There's 4 different pathways to lower homocysteine, and trimethylglycine hits one of the major four pathways. And for some people, they'll try to use things like tetrahydrofolate to reduce their homocysteine, as common polymorphism people have in the population, but it doesn't work for them. And some people actually just need that trimethylglycine. So trimethylglycine is really providing methyl groups. And when you're looking at homocysteine reduction into cysteine, you just sometimes need those methyl groups, and the trimethylglycine is just providing those. And that's the mechanism how it helps reduce inflammation. Okay,
No more.
I'll take a few more,
Okay.
and then we'll keep. People get bored after a while. My wife's already bored. She says.
Just kidding. Thank you for taking the time to the important topic. Okay, can you speak a little bit more about transcendental meditation?
Transcendental meditation is awesome. So transcendental meditation is basically, you basically you can go to a transcendental meditation center place, and they teach you how to do the meditation. And for the most part, you're just concentrating, focusing on a word or a sound or a statement, and then but you let your mind focus on it, and it's okay for it to deviate, and you go back and back into it, and you go out of it, and it just changes brain activity, and it changes your brain activity in a way where you actually have rest. And there's been some really good studies published on the effects of transcendental meditation, where there's better creativity, better performance, reduced in stress response, and for the most part, think of it, your brain gets a chance to recover and rest throughout the day. So it puts you in a brainwave activity that is restful to the brain. So when you're constantly focused and thinking and concentrating, your mind is just all over the place. It's nice to change your brainwave activity by doing transcendental meditation so you can have recovery and rest. And a lot of times, I can tell you for myself, it allows me to have greater endurance to be able to do more things, and it helps calm down the stress response. So there's lots of places where you can learn transcendental meditation, and lots of centers, and you may want to take the time and energy to have someone walk you through it and teach you how to do it properly. And I think it'll be a tool you can have for the rest of your life, and it definitely will help you be more efficient in everything that you do, and it will definitely help with your stress response. Okay.
People are like bored. How could you? I'm like, I like to give them a hard time.
All right. So I think we got
People appreciate your talks. They're very grateful. It's really very kind.
Well, thank you everyone for being so kind, and we'll try to do these on a regular basis. Thank you all for jumping in, and I really appreciate your kind words and for participating. Thanks again.